the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, our west coast became a potential combat zone. Living in that zone were more than 100,000 persons of Japanese ancestry. No one knew what would happen among this concentrated population if Japanese forces should try to invade our shores.
Japan had just bombed Pearl Harbor, uniting Americans in a sense of uncertainty and fear for the upcoming future of their country. In response to their enemy's attack, the United States of America declared war on Japan, inevitably becoming an accomplice of the blood that was shed during World War II.
Along with the war-induced unrest amongst the American public was the suspicion of the nation's residents of Japanese descent. This paranoia unleashed a fervor of agitation aimed towards the country's Japanese population. People protested for their removal, fearing that any one of them could be accessories to the enemy intentions of the Japanese Empire.
Executive Order 9066 initially enforced the policy that no civilian should be allowed in military areas. However, Lieutenant General John L. DeWitt eventually convinced the government to rewrite any of the limitations, such as adding curfews, to be applied solely to Japanese Americans.
It was difficult. It really was. I can't even find words to describe the feeling. You know, your home is your safe haven. We were herded onto the ferry, and then you think, am I ever gonna see my home again?
The bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941 escalated discrimination already aimed towards Japanese Americans. The social impact left by political movements such as Executive Order 9066 resulted in an era of Japanese American isolation that took place far from their homes in uncomfortable and unfamiliar environments. The isolation forced many incarcerated Japanese to undergo cultural shifts that are still felt by their future generations today. The injustices felt by the incarcerated minorities during this time changed the nation's perspective on ethnic-based legislation.
On March 29, 1942, as a result of increasing turbulence within the country, General John L. DeWitt formally published Public Proclamation No. 2, which officially marked the beginning of Japanese Americans' relocation into internment camps.
By admitting Japanese persons in America to internment camps, took part in rights and responsibilities by installing the Alien Administration Act of 1940 and the Wartime Civil Control Administration. By enforcing the Alien Administration Act, the government of the USA hoped to be able to lawfully accuse non-citizens of crimes against the nation.
The Wartime Civil Control Administration was responsible for organizing the detention camps in which the Japanese would be held, removing the citizens and enforcing removal policies. More than 110,000 Japanese Americans were removed from their homes and were forcibly dispersed into 10 different internment camps across the nation.
He said aliens and non-aliens, and we thought, who in the Sam Hill is non-aliens? That was us. They didn't dare say American citizens.
The living conditions in the camps were manageable but far less than ideal. Bathing, using the bathroom, and eating all had to be done in public. The climates they had to endure were usually extreme, ranging from 30 degrees Fahrenheit all the way to 100-degree weather.
It was very hot in the summer and very windy, and with all the wind, there was a lot of whirlwind. It was always dusty in the house.
Camps like Manzanar also regularly faced intense sandstorms and flooding. The poor construction of the barracks sometimes didn't provide adequate shelter.
Despite these conditions, young children were often oblivious to the reasons for why they were moved to this unfamiliar, barren area. Even more so, many children had no idea that war was even occurring. Radios were scarce in the camps, leaving children and adults alike unaware of how the war was progressing or when they'd be able to return to their homes.
Although many children claimed to have felt a sense of adventure in their new environments they were exploring, the adults were reported to have felt extremely under pressure. Stress inflicted by the camps heavily impacted the mental well-being of the incarcerated Japanese. Nisei parents frequently avoided the topic of incarceration with their Sansei children. These avoidant behaviors strained familial and cultural relations between Nisei and Sansei generations.
And my father didn't want to talk about anything like that. So he didn't want us talking about it, so we didn't talk about it. He didn't talk. It brought too much bad memories, because you figure brother passed away, and a couple months later my mother passed away, and we went to Santa Anita, and then from there we went to Manzanar. My father had all this thing that he was worried about.
Almost 200 of the Japanese had to be institutionalized due to the overwhelming psychological stress that they endured. The amounts of suicides increased 4 times more in Japanese Americans compared to before incarceration. While caged behind the camps' barbed wire, they had no idea when they were going to be released, what the state of their properties were, or where they find work.
In order to prove their loyalty to the United States, Nisei began to reject their culture and shun anything associated with it. This included objects manufactured in Japan or interactions with other Japanese people.
They stopped speaking the language, right, and didn't teach it to their kids. And when they came out, there was such a pressure and a desire to assimilate that I think many of these Japanese Americans just didn't learn Japanese because they wanted so much to be American and be perceived as American. And even though they were already, they didn't need to give all those things up, but I think they felt they did.
After an average of 2 to 4 years in the internment camps, the Japanese were finally liberated and released back to their homes. However, upon returning, many of their homes had people living in them, were looted, vandalized, or sold. Those who remained in America were forced to start back from scratch and rebuild their lives in America, with new jobs and new homes if they could afford them.
In 1983, almost 4 decades after the relocation movement, CWRIC, or the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians, and the Redress Movement requested that government apologize for their wrongdoings, provide $20,000 to each surviving incarceree, and to create an education trust fund as compensation.
Their request for monetary compensation was approved, and in 1988, the Civil Liberties Act was passed and apologized for the injustices inflicted onto the Japanese American population and provided each incarceree with $20,000. One of the overseers of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 was civil rights advocate Fred Korematsu. Despite his fruitless efforts to combat the U.S. government's attempts to force him into internment camps, he continued to resist, which eventually led to his arrest. He brought the inequalities of the internment to national light and to the Supreme Court.
After multiple trials and failed attempts to reclaim justice, the Supreme Court cleared his conviction, winning the praise of many. Even after his trial, he continued to fight for the rights of not only Japanese Americans, but the liberties of all Americans.
His contributions to democracy eventually granted him the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1998.
Aside from Korematsu, many Japanese Americans are doing what they can today to reverse the effects and eliminate the issues highlighted by the Japanese internment. To reclaim the lost part of their cultural identity, many Japanese Americans today are participating in cultural movements aimed towards re-educating themselves and their descendants about Japanese culture, arts, and language. There are some incarcerees and descendants of them who use their experiences as people of Japanese descent to advocate for civil rights and the eradication of Asian and racial discrimination.
Now, there's so much that's going on now that I don't know how things gonna change. Don't know how things are gonna change.
In this new age, as new generations arise, it's our duty for us to recall these stories of our country's troubled past to teach one another the importance of acceptance and understanding.
It is our responsibility to embrace the darkness of our nation's past by learning from her errors and growing together.
Through this, we will further unite our diverse nation to achieve our greatest strengths and potential.